Mass Effect Andromeda for me has been a unique experience to say the least. I cannot describe how much I loved the original trilogy, and although the third game had its problems when it comes to narrative and the first game is pretty archaic when it comes to its mechanics, it's an amazing series that delivered on most of the stuff that they promised from the get-go. The Mass Effect trilogy was one of the really big budget titles that took the whole consistent world and game saves that would be transferable along with your choices from one another and run with it and really delivered something special, although it stumbled in some cases and, well, made a mess of some stuff. Ragnar Quinn, I'm looking at you. So, what's wrong with Mass Effect Andromeda specifically? One cannot look at this game in good faith and say, well, Mass Effect Andromeda is a pile of shit, because the game is not that bad, not by a long shot. The case with Mass Effect Andromeda can be detected in two major departments. One was the overconfidence of the studio that wanted to make something that was pretty much out of their league. And the second one was EA's meddling with the whole project. I don't know if you've been informed about this back in the day or in the years that followed, but Mass Effect Andromeda's development was marred with problems. One of them being the fact that EA demanded that they use Frostbite, an engine designed around first-person shooters, to manage all the microsystems and the inventories of this game, which, well, wasn't the strongest suit of the engine to say the least. So the developers had to work with an engine that was not intended to be used for a game like this, and they had to make the best of what they could. Also, they initially started with the notion that they would create a game of procedurally generated planets like No Man's Sky, but they had to ditch that in order to deliver a more consistent experience because, as they said, it was pretty much empty spaces where you would be running, collecting resources and getting bored to death. Note that the final approach to this was a big improvement. Like, the game still had pretty underwhelming side quests, and the areas you'd move in are pretty generic and kind of boring. Well, maybe not Dragon Age Inquisition boring, but still kind of boring. But the thing is, players who followed the original trilogy expected more. Mass Effect 1 had a huge issue with repeated environments, but Mass Effect 2 fixed all that, and Mass Effect 3 refined it even further. Some of the exploration was taken out, yes, but we got a more streamlined, more consistent experience. If you want to make a game like this, that allows free exploration, you have to go the Witcher 3's way. You have to make the secondary missions, you have to make your main storyline intriguing as all hell, so your player will stay invested after they've been wandering around for about 30 hours getting loot out of random chests. So lack of a clear vision and the inconsistencies in how it was handled from the get-go were a major issue, but another thing that marred this game's reputation was that when it released, Mass Effect Andromeda was a broken, glitchy and buggy mess. The game was nigh unplayable, quests would be breaking left and right, character animations were, well, it's pretty tough to describe. You can go and check a bit online and you will see what I mean. T-posting characters everywhere without physics, head spinning around, zero facial expressions. It was all the rage back then to create those AI controlled facial expressions that would match the character you created and then create expressions for the rest of the characters. Pretty much experimental technology back in the day, and it didn't work at all. It was really, really bad. So the game was very glitchy, very problematic, and very hard to stomach all the problems that came with it. How does it fare on that department 4 years later? Well, for a game of this scale, it's in a very good state, I have to say. Mass Effect Andromeda was literally raised from the dead when it comes to its performance. The game is very stable. It also runs without a hitch. No major bugs, no quest killing bugs, no character T-posing or disappearing or falling through the ground stuff. It's a bit rough around the edges when it comes to how people, when they die, disappear in thin air. When you do not disintegrate enemies, they just fade away. But that's understandable because the environments are really big. And we've been seeing this for many years, like back in Resident Evil 4. Even though the environments were not as big, you had to deal with less powerful systems and you had to cut some corners so the enemies would just disintegrate into pools of mud. That's not an issue. I'm not gonna moan about things that are purely technical when the developer's heart is in the right place. So in 2021, the game runs really well. I'm talking consoles because, of course, if you have a PC of our era, running this game will be a joke. It will run smoothly, it will run fine, and you can mod it and put some improvements that were created by the fanbase and make it even better. So, discussing all this, why is Andromeda still a game that is not as loved as its predecessors, even though it was fixed, even though it has a ton of content, even though there was no mistreatment of the IP from the developer side, because, well, the publisher is a totally different issue. The problem with Andromeda is it lacks a soul, so to speak. If you go out there in the wilds, that's the internet, and type in Vakarian or Garus or Rex or Tali or Miranda or whatever, you will find a million meme templates, fan art, and so on and so forth. That's because every single one of the characters found in the original trilogy, even Ashley and Kaidan, who were like the more generic human characters that, well, are not as memorable, every single one of the characters in the original trilogy was a remarkable specimen of writing, presentation, and character arcs. They were all interesting people, no matter the race they came from. They were characters with an agenda, with motives, with actual character. They were creatures of purpose. And that tied really well with the fact that Shepard and the galaxy he inhabited along with his teammates were entities that actually shaped the situations that they went in, and the actions that were performed were huge of scale, huge of impact, and actually narrated and presented in a way that stuck with you. There was a hint of genius in the first 3 Mass Effect games. The writing was solid, as I stated. Writing in these games, guys, it's the alpha and the omega. If you don't have a well-written RPG, you pretty much have nothing. You can look at games like Disco Elysium and Shadowrun Returns. You can look at even the mainstream ones like The Witcher. You can look at 1,000 games that I can mention. You can even go back to Bioware's original Baldur's Gate, the duology with their expansions, and the writing is still amazing. It's like reading a really well written book. And of course you had Karpyshyn and all these guys back in the day who were really passionate about the whole thing, and it started falling apart when publishers started meddling because they wanted to go really big with their projects and ending up going really low. But that's money politics and not something I want to go into. I'm here to talk about the game. So the game pretty much lacks a soul. The game is filled with generic quests, generic dialogue, generic characters. The character that you will also be that you will actually be picking for each mission, the characters that follow you, the only difference they make is what abilities they might be using, and if you pick their, well, let's say their passive boons that will actually help you because you will be doing all the heavy lifting anyway, you're pretty much set. There is a bit of banter, there are actually dozens of lines of banter, but few are actually memorable, and I won't say that there's none, because there were people working on this that really wanted it to turn out good, and they did a, let's say, fine job, a decent job of making a decent game. But for people my age, I'm nearing 35 now, actually 34 in about 3 weeks. We pretty much went through our, let's say, study years. We were getting our diplomas, we were finding our way in the world, and every time Mass Effect was in the horizon, time would stop. Time would stop, we would be expecting Mass Effect like it was like better than Christmas, and each and every one of these 3 attempts of BioWare to give us something special pretty much paid off. I have to underline here that the ending of the 3rd game and the trilogy was a freaking disgrace. It was so fucking bad, it was awful, but I come from the they made it better team here. I'm on their side on this because with Citadel DLC and the complete endings, they pretty much remedied that. They are not the most original thing you can think when it comes to storytelling, but they are functional, they're interesting, and they were pretty much, well, the best they could do after the initial mess that they created. They were pretty much well executed, let's say. Mass Effect was huge. Okay. It was a time in BioWare's life where they actually had a fantasy RPG running alongside their science fiction thing, and in a world where people can't get enough of orcs and elves for some reason that really is a mystery to me. People were looking at BioWare first and foremost for their sci-fi IP, and it was very refreshing to see that happen. So we were expecting the second coming of Jesus when Mass Effect Andromeda was about to come out, and it was red flags everywhere, like the time it took. The time that went between showing a trailer and the initial announcement was baffling. It was all pre-rendered stuff and cutscenes and so on and so forth, and we're like, so was the actual gameplay. When Mass Effect 2's, I think it was E3 gameplay, they showed the Kane, the nuke launcher. It was a battle section, you would see separate fighting, and then by the end you would draw out the Kane and destroy a bunch of husks with it with a nuclear explosion, and our collective jaws dropped to the floor. We were dumbstruck. So we got one trailer for Mass Effect Andromeda. It was the Pathfinder rider running in some ruins and activating some switches. And then more cutscenes. And the cutscenes were well choreographed and well executed, running on optimal hardware, and they were double checked and triple checked and all that cyberpunk marketing approach stuff. And when it finally came out, guys, it was a nightmare. It was a freaking nightmare. Even if you could muster all the goodwill in the world, you couldn't really wrap your head around why you should bother going through all the problems to get to the meat, quote unquote, of a very mediocre story. And there's really not much they can do about this whole microcosmos they have created here with Andromeda, because we just don't care. They failed to grab us. The Archon dude, the enemies you're fighting, the system, the actual mechanics, the way you approach your character development, there is a huge element of what ever to the whole thing. Very generic stuff, and you don't feel like you're investing heavily on something in order for it to actually work story-wise or gameplay-wise. The combat in Andromeda can be fun and it can be interesting, but it's pretty clunky. And their best idea, the architects that you find after you complete each planet, huge enemies that you can destroy in order to get unique mods, they just became so formulaic. After 40 hours, you would just know that by the end of each planet, an architect would expect you, and it would be always the same battle, the same mechanics, the same weak spots, just scaled to your level so they wouldn't become pushovers after you were overpowered. And even Insanity, after a certain point, it was pretty pointless. I remember Mass Effect 2 was destroying me on Insanity. It was destroying me up to the end. It was a battle for survival, and I freaking loved it. So if you haven't played Andromeda yet and you just want to know what it's all about, it's a decent, functional science fiction RPG at this point that you might enjoy if you like the broader strokes of the Mass Effect mythology, and that's pretty much about it. I highly recommend you get your hands on the Legendary Edition of the original trilogy, 3 of the best RPGs ever made. I'm not even gonna go the way of saying that they are 3 of the best science fiction or space opera RPGs or whatever. They're 3 of the best RPGs ever made, regardless of genre, regardless of what you prefer, what you like. You might be, I don't know, a horseman with zero imagination and you just wanna see gung-ho marines shooting at stuff and that's all you like about gaming. But if you go into Mass Effect, I guarantee you will find stuff to love. You will appreciate the humor, you will appreciate the writing, you will love, appreciate and remember the characters for the rest of your damn lives. Mordin, why? Okay, so guys, Mass Effect Andromeda, it's a time waster. You can go in, you can enjoy some of its aspects. I was really disappointed. I ended up playing a lot of hours of Mass Effect Andromeda, and every time I would see something that I liked about how the game was handled, how the game was approached, about certain aspects of its gameplay, about some of the banter, about some of the environments, the technology that powers it. I was playing on the PlayStation 5 the last time I booted it up, and you can see footage from that here, and the game is 30 FPS capped. You cannot benefit really from the machine's horsepower. You just get better loading time and that's pretty much it. But keep your expectations in check if you try to approach this after you're done with the Legendary Collection, if you decide to get your hands on it. So it's been FiOth. I recently got a new mic and I wanted to make this vid with the new mic. I hope I sound better than I sounded in the past, because people have been giving me beef about all that for the past, I don't know, few years. Got a new mic, I hope I sound better. And I will probably be covering stuff in the Legendary Edition. I'm covering Returnal right now, you can check that out. Returnal is a masterpiece, you should all play it if you have a PS5. But keep following the channel, I'll have more essays like this, more opinion pieces. Hope you enjoyed, sub, like and share if you did. Until next time, be well, stay frosty, and always strive for perfection. Cheers!